Spirit of God, open our hearts to your word spoken for us, that in hearing you, Christ will be revealed and we will be free. Amen. So Epiphany, Three Kings, Little Christmas, known by many, many different names, is one of those, I think, not fully understood and underappreciated celebrations. It's sort of like the Ascension or Ash Wednesday. We know about them, we've heard about them, we recognize them, but they aren't major points in our faith life like Christmas or Easter are, the two big ones. Epiphany sort of gets dismissed, I think, as that story about the three kings, or the three wise men or magi, whatever we call them, with gold and frankincense and myrrh. Some people actually wait until this day to bring out the camels and the wise men and put them in the creche scene. For many, this is the unofficial day when Christmas ends. People wait till this week to take the decorations down, as I'm sure many of us will, including my own house. We see that Christmas is sort of over. After all, this is the 12th day of Christmas. But Epiphany, I think, is more than that. It's more than these things. It's more than a story about three wise men and three gifts. It's more than the unofficial marker of the end of Christmas. The word Epiphany means a sudden and unexpected revelation of God. The original Greek means the striking appearance of God, to suddenly come into view. It's the notion of being surprised at the sight of God. See, Epiphany is about seeking and suddenly finding God in ways and in places that you never expected. An example of this we've seen, I'm sure, especially at this time of year, the commercials where a soldier comes home unexpectedly and surprises his or her family. There was one this year, actually, that I'm sure, when you see it, will move you to tears. So there's this big box with a ribbon on it. The little guy's taking the paper off, takes the ribbon off, and out comes his dad. And of course, they hug and they embrace, and people in the commercial, people watching it, are tearful. Sometimes you see it on AFV, when a couple surprises the parents with the news that they're pregnant. And you keep giving them these clues. They'll show them a picture of a sonogram or something like that, and they're not getting it. And then suddenly it sinks in. And you see this look of complete shock and joy come over them, and elation. And they're screaming in happiness. That's Epiphany, the sudden revelation of God. That's the experience of Epiphany. Only it's when we find God, who we thought was hidden and suddenly in front of us, is the true Epiphany. The thing is, though, as I showed with our little ones here in the star, in order to find, we have to follow. That's the story of Epiphany. Following something greater than yourself. Following into a place you have never been. Not always being sure where you will end up. And we start by looking for God first in everything in our life, and I mean everything. Stephen Hawking, the brilliant mind and famous atheist who passed in 2018, once said to his children, "Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet." I think for a person who had no belief in God, this quote is the starting point for finding God, even though I think Stephen Hawking missed its real meaning. Get your eyes pointed upwards. Literally and spiritually, look for God. Just like you won't see the stars if you're staring at your feet, you will not find God if you aren't looking in the right place and in the right way. The Epiphany is not contained in just one day. Epiphany can happen every day, that sudden striking appearance of God who was always there. We just keep missing it. We talk about seeing God in others, and yes, we do. God present in all people. But it's really about the how of seeing God that Epiphany is about. It's about seeing like God sees. To be able to see others as God sees them. Especially those who are rejected, unwelcome, turned away, those who are considered unworthy, less than, and undeserving. because of their skin, their language, their birthplace, because of who they love and how they dress, or what they've done in the past. Those we build walls against, emotional, psychological walls, and yes, physical walls. If we begin to see them as God sees them, it's not so black and white anymore. It's sort of like those placards we've seen on people's lawns. There's one right over here on Driscoll. Drive like your kids live here. Makes us think of things in a different way. That's sort of it. When we start to see other people the way we see those we love most, then things start to change. Things aren't so cut and dry anymore. We realize how complex this world really is. For those of us who have children or grandchildren, think of them. Think of them in that moment of purest love. The 3 or 4 or 5 when they fall asleep in your arms. When they would see you for the first time in the morning like you were the world to them because you know what? You were. Or on Christmas morning in their pajamas ripping open gifts and unfettered kid Christmas happiness. Or even now when they're a little bit older, when they come to you for help or guidance, and you know that even in their rebellion and their burgeoning independence, you are still important. And they really do need you. Think of your children. Think of your grandchildren. For those who don't have children, who is it that holds the deepest place in your heart? Who is it that you love most deeply? Who can't you wait to see? So think of them. Now, put them in the place of the ones you reject. The ones who aren't allowed in. Those who are different, those who make us uncomfortable, those we reject and cast aside. I'll tell you, I do this myself often. People that I write off, I dismiss. People I know that I see in news stories. And I say to myself, what if that were Luke? What if that were Matthew? Or David? How would I want them treated? How would I want other people to view them and to respond to them and help them? And I'll tell you, it's a sudden wake-up call for me. And I am far less harsh at that moment. That's my epiphany. Because in that moment, I see as God sees. And it all looks very different. See, we're sort of quick to judge and to say this person is in, this person is out, but it's not so clear when we take those that we love most and put them in their place. See, God sees every person created the same way you see your child, your grandchild, the one that you love most deeply. When we see like God, that is your epiphany, and everything changes. There was a story that happened back in 2003. I just actually learned this morning. It was on 48 Hours last night. The story of a young man named Bart Whitaker and his dad, Kent. But back in 2003, Bart was 28 years old, and all his life Bart had struggled with this feeling of just not measuring up, of not being good enough. And we all struggle with this at some point in growing up, but for Bart it was particularly difficult, and he blamed his parents for always having this unattainable point of measuring him. And as he grew, that resentment grew, and he said in high school it started to change to hatred. And in his own words, he said he just wanted revenge for being alive. So Bart hired someone to sneak into his house while the family was out to dinner. When they came home, to kill them. So Bart had his family go out to dinner one night. They had a wonderful time, and they laughed. And when they came home, the shooter was in the house and promptly killed his mother and his younger brother, shot his dad in the shoulder, and grazed Bart, as was planned. His dad and Bart survived. police eventually figured out what happened, and Bart was convicted for capital murder and sentenced to death. When we think about this guy, we look at this person and say, what an animal. Who does that? Who hires somebody to kill their little brother, their mom, their dad? Who does it? What kind of monster would do something like that? But here's the thing. That's not seen with the eyes of a parent. It's not how Kent, his dad, saw his child. For 15 years, Kent eventually forgave his son for taking so much from him. And he fought nonstop to have the sentence of death lifted, appealing from the courts to the prison board to the governor to spare his son's life, because it was his child. The whole time he was angry at his son who killed his other son and his wife, but he also saw Bart as his child and looked on him with the love of a father. He forgave him and loved him in all of it, always looking at him not as an object, not as a murderer, not as a monster, but as his child. In the end, on February 22nd of 2018, the day that Bart was set to be executed, 45 minutes prior to his death, the sentence was commuted by the governor of Texas, as the governor would later state, due to the incredible and nonstop efforts of his dad, Kent. Now we might say, well, of course this guy is going to do this. It's his dad. Of course he's going to fight for his life. But the lesson in this story is this. That's how God sees all of us. That's how God sees every one of us, in this church and outside of this church. Those who do good and those who choose the wrong path. God sees all of us the same way we see our own child in the moment of our deepest love for them. Love colors everything that God sees. It's how God sees the nail salon owner in Las Vegas who was run over and killed this week after chasing a woman who didn't pay. That was his daughter. Just like you have a daughter and a son. But it's also how he sees the woman who did it, who's now a fugitive. God sees Jasmine Barnes, the 7-year-old black girl in North Carolina, in Houston, who was shot in the head. The same way you see your 7-year-old or once saw your 7-year-old. And as hard as it is to get my head around, he sees the shooter, just like I would see my own child, the person I love most deeply. That's what we're challenged to. That's what we're called to in Epiphany, to look at the world through those eyes. So this week and after, when you see a person you know or who's on TV, when you feel like you want to dismiss or condemn or reject or label or send back home or put down, see your child or the one you love most deeply in this world in their place. Really take a few seconds to switch places in your mind. How would I treat them if that was my child? How would I want others to react to them if that were my own? And when you see anyone who is hurt or being victimized or pushed around, someone in pain, do the same thing. And you'll feel a little bit of what God feels. And I'll tell you, if you can do that, it will change you on the spot. When you do that, suddenly and unexpectedly, there is God. And you will experience Epiphany. Epiphany is also a reminder to you that when you struggle and suffer and question and wonder about your future, when you're afraid and on the edge, when you don't feel like anyone is hearing you or understanding you and what you're going through, that God sees you in that moment with the same love you feel for the person you love most. And when you get that, when you really understand that you are loved that much, you'll know that God hears you and does see you and will get you out of whatever you are in. Because wouldn't you do that for the person you love most? See, my sisters and brothers, Epiphany is not a day. It's not about kings and gifts. Epiphany is an invitation every day to see as God sees. Jesus Christ and the Gospels welcomed all, healed all, embraced all people, Roman, Gentile, foreigner, unclean, criminal, despised. People who made all the wrong decisions in their life, those are the ones he chose as his disciples and welcomed. Because he saw them. He saw them as his Father saw them. And that made them different. They weren't what the world said they were, or what the religious leaders said they were. They were children. So what they did was not as important as who they were. So raise your eyes up. God will give you the grace to see people as God sees them. And I'll tell you, your life will be different when you suddenly and unexpectedly find God right in front of you. Amen.
Amen.
It did be so.